Once again, sweeping the beach, trying to talk about big topics in short periods of time. Davide Piaggio, take it away, sir. Talking about PPE, what did we learn?
Hi everyone, I am Davide Piaggio. I'm a PhD student from the University of Warwick and teaching fellow and research assistant. I've been working on the response to COVID, in particular with PPE, supporting Professor Leandro Pecchia and the WHO. At the moment, Leandro Pecchia is a project manager for the R&D blueprint at the WHO, and he will probably join the Q&A question later on today. So today I will speak about the evolution of the PPE problem during the COVID-19. Next, please. This is just a recap. PPE, personal protective equipment, according to the EU regulation, is any kind of equipment that is worn by workers to protect themselves from hazards at their health and safety. And also interchangeable components and connection systems are classed as PPE. Some examples are the gloves, the respirators, goggles, and so on. Next slide, please. This is just a trend of the European Patent Office granted patent applications for medical devices, which are the purple curve, pharma and biotech products. You can see that the only upward trend is that of medical devices, and they are in fact increasing year by year. The other two are sort of stable and are actually decreasing. While we focus on these, we can see that PPE is missing from the main report, so there is nothing about PPE. Next slide, please. So we compared the top 10 most impactful medical devices during the centuries, and in the next slides you will also see the PPE history line. Go back, please. In the medical device you can see that from the 13th century, we started having spectacles, medical thermometers, and then there were stethoscopes, X-ray machines, cardiac pacemakers, cardiac defibrillators, and so on. And you can see that most of the innovations came in the last 200 years, where we could see the advance of technology. Now, if we go to the next slide, you can see that for the PPE, there wasn't such changes. In fact, what we had back in the days, you can see that also already in the 800 before Christ, there were the first prototypes of helmets and protective gloves, and then footwear, PPE, eye protectors, and surgical masks and respirators came much later. Next slide, please. And here we compare the evolution of a medical device, in this case a medical ventilator, with the evolution of a face mask. And you can see that while the ventilator went through different changes, starting from a completely different technology that was based on negative pressure, and then nowadays is based on positive pressure. And for doing this evolution, it took less than 100 years. You can see that as regards face masks, yes, we have a very different one that was used during the Black Death. But then the face mask design didn't change much in the years, and also this change took 700 years. Next slide, please. So what was the problem with COVID-19 and PPE? The problem was that healthcare workers were the ones used to using PPE, but when it came to lay people, so normal people, they weren't used to using them. So when they were told to wear them, they were maybe wearing them in the wrong ways, like with the nose out, or they were finding creative solutions to this, like you can see in the pictures below, with the water bottle or with the journal newspaper as a cone. But these are unsafe and not useful ways of wearing masks. Next slide, please. And yes, the problem was that at the beginning of the pandemic and for all the first months, there was a PPE shortage. I reported here the main newspaper headlines, also one from the WHO, which are saying that there was a shortage of PPE. And in some cases, also in the NHS in England, healthcare workers started using bean bags as protection. And this is explainable why, if you only look at the numbers on the left, which are the numbers of required PPE every month by only healthcare workers. And if you imagine that these should be multiplied by several numbers to obtain a coverage of all the population, at least for masks and hand sanitizer, the numbers are very high. Please, next slide. And the problem was also that at the beginning, manufacturers were trying to reschedule their production line to help this shortage of PPE, but they didn't find much help in the current regulations and standards, because the current PPE regulations and standards, like the ones for face visors or for filtering half masks, are very general and not and outdated and not ready for a pandemic and or emergency. In fact, they are made for including all the possible scenarios in which these face masks and these respirators and these visors should be used, like also in heavy industry. And so they required for some heavy equipment heavy and time-consuming tests that shouldn't be there for healthcare applications, like the bullet test for face visors, for example. So these ordinary procedures for testing and certifying PPE have been questioned and have been have been empowered with fast-track pathways. And meanwhile, also dangerous and unsafe do-it-yourself solutions have flourished. Next slide, please. In the meantime, the WHO has given this interim guidance recommending to use PPE for avoiding, for when in contact with people suspect of with COVID-19, and also when doing some airborne generating procedures. But for example, they did not recommend the use of the reuse of PPE unless it's decontaminated, or the use of a face mask over a respirator. Next slide, please. And here you can see all the necessary pillars that are needed for having a decontamination and reprocessing of PPE in place. There has to be a way of safely transporting the PPE, contaminated PPE, to the place of decontamination. There have to be available different methods that are efficient for the decontamination. We have to assess the performance and the performance of the PPE after the contamination, and that we have to make sure that there is no residual toxicity and so on. Next slide, please. These four are four evidence-supported methods for reprocessing respirators during severe shortages. You can approved by the WHO. We can see that there is UV radiation, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, dry heat, and methylene blue plus light. These methods can be used up to 5 times per respirator, but only if the respirator maintains integrity. And integrity is measured by measuring the fitting, the filtration performance, and the breathability. Comparing these guidelines with the US CDC guidelines, we can see that more or less these indicators are similar, but we know that the US CDC is focusing less on breathability. Next slide, please. These are some common household methods that can be used for disinfecting face shields and goggles and gowns. Next slide, please. And in conclusion, after 1 year, PPE grew as much as medical devices in 10 years, but still a lot remains to be done, such as catalyzing the PPE innovation, improving the usage, the contamination and disposal of PPE, strengthening the procurement practices, and improving the underlying standards and quality of the PPE. Thank you.
Incredible job, David and Leandro, teammate. And I don't think any of us will soon forget the water bottle on the face, brother.